So, a bit interesting that he's having problems. A new look for that car this weekend, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to be able to see much action with the left-hand side of that car in terrible, terrible shape. He only joined us at Circuit of the Americas. He missed the first 4 races at Sebring and Barber, and was looking like he was going to have some good results because he was on the upswing until Watkins Glen kind of went south for him, and this is unfortunately continuing that form for him as things have unraveled early on.
It is a partial season this year for Tim, but he does have a lot of experience. He was 5th in the 991 class championship last year, driving for this same Fall Line Motorsports team. He's a former SCCA national champion. He won the GT2 class at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway back in 2021. He's got Trans Am experience. He's done a bunch of different racing over the course of his long career in motorsports. So tough to see the veteran with the miscue here, but clearly that car is not going to take any further part in the qualifying session. And we've had a number of cars suffer some crashes over the course of testing and practice back earlier in the week, and there are not a lot of spares to be found, it's safe to say. So these can be pretty big consequences, even for relatively minor damage, just because it's so difficult to find spares right now.
I don't know if I would describe this one as minor damage
no,
either.
I agree.
Yeah.
This one is more significant than that, but even minor damage could have the ability to be a big setback.
That was down in turn 5, and I was trying to figure out how he damaged the left-hand side of the car, actually. Oh, so looks like maybe lost it under braking, because that is into the inside wall entering turn 5. And that would explain why it was torn up as badly as it is. That is one of the fastest parts of the racetrack right there.
That's a tough braking zone, too. It's downhill. You come at it at a bit of an angle, and it's an easy place to have a miscue. Boy, that is definitely a used-up race car there, but definitely a shame to see that Fall Line car torn up like that. 17.5 minutes to go, and of note, there are no times on the board.
So what will happen with that is if nobody is able to get a time, then they will use their practice 2 times to try and set the grid. They should have enough time, especially considering that car is already on the hook, and it looks like they'll have it on the flatbed shortly.
The only question I have is, are the barriers still where they need to be from a safety perspective? It didn't seem like they were dislodged in any kind of meaningful way, but we also didn't get a great look at it, and the safety crew here at Road America, of course, will be taking a close look at that. They won't be sending the cars back out on track if things aren't ship shape, and the crew right there is taking a look at it now. What do you think?
I think they're getting rid of some of the banners that he's taken down, unfortunately, and I think that should be okay. It looks like maybe he caught it just as that wall juts out, because I don't think he moved it from what I can see there. But it certainly is going to be doing some serious damage to the car itself if he did hit it right where it sticks out. But again, we didn't see any live pictures, so we don't know exactly what caused it, but we can only guess that something went wrong with the car, unless maybe he had a little bit of help. But I haven't seen anybody return in with any sort of damage on the car or be singled out in messages here on from race control. So I'm going to guess that was a single car incident.
Well, as we stay under red here, maybe it gives us a chance to talk about this great venue, Road America, which has been here since 1955, but the racing heritage in this part of the country goes further back than that, much like the last venue where we went, Watkins Glen. Racing started here through the country roads and city streets, including through the village of Elkhart Lake, which is not far at all from where the circuit is currently located. But ultimately, there was a transition period where those street type of races and road type of races were starting to shift away to more permanent circuits, and Cliff Tufte was the man who dreamed up this place, purchased this land in the 1950s from the Elkhart Lake Sand and Gravel Company, Cliff himself was a trained civil engineer, and so he was the one that developed the plan for this track, put up $75,000 up front to purchase the land and make the investment, and I think it has been repaid many thousands of times over because this is one of the great circuits on the continent.
Now I'll have to try and look up what the inflation
Yeah.
creates, because I mean 75,000 to now, and from 1955 I think it was, should be a pretty significant chunk of change. And you know, he talked about how he developed this place as a civil engineer. Great use of the natural terrain, which from what I understand and what I've been told is actually been developed by glaciers, which is why you've got sort of these rolling hills here.
So you'll hear this region referred to as the Kettle Moraine region of Wisconsin. And a couple years ago I got curious, what exactly is a kettle and what is a moraine? And the answer to that, if you're curious, is that a kettle is a geographic term for a depression or hole in an outwash plain formed by retreating glaciers. So there you go, Joe. Results of blocks of dead ice being left behind by those glaciers, which becomes surrounded by sediment. Ice becomes buried in the sediment. When that ice melts, a depression is left called a kettle hole, often filled in by shallow lakes, including Elkhart Lake, which is nearby. A moraine is a geographical term for an accumulation of unconsolidated glacial debris, such as rocks or boulders, carried along by a glacier. So that's why you have the rolling hills and the lakes that dot this part of the country.
Thank you, Professor.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and honestly, one of those things that I think a lot of people, again, you wouldn't expect. I think the idea of the Midwest for most people is, you know, very flat and wide open. That's definitely not what Wisconsin is like once you get up here into this region, and this track is a big testament to that. As we've gone back to green flag racing with a heavily shortened session now. We've only got literally half the time left on the clock, and you could tell that the drivers were in a hurry to get going as all of them immediately zipped out of pit lane.
Great to see the cars back up at speed, and they won't be wasting any time, will they, to try and get those tires warmed up and put those fast laps in, because 12 minutes, 40 seconds, that's going to go away quick when we're talking about laps at speed of up over 2 minutes. And this first lap, of course, won't be fully at speed. This is a crucial time here to jockey for position, to get the track position you want, but you got to be careful too. We see cars weaving back and forth, other cars trying to make some passes, and we've seen that go amiss. If you go back a couple of weeks, I think there was an incident, wasn't there, at Watkins Glen? That was actually in an IMSA race, come to think of it. Sorry, I'm getting my Watkins Glen weekends confused.
We have had those in this series as well. Barber was a hugely contentious one earlier on in the season. And in fact, it kind of surprises me that we're seeing some of these cars pass, because since then they've kind of locked down on it a bit. It's not an official rule that you cannot pass, but again, they line them up according to their practice times, because it kind of sets, you know, so that drivers aren't tripping over each other. But that's on the initial start. I wonder if some of these drivers are thinking, well, this isn't an initial start, so maybe some of those expectations for them have gone out the window. And there could be a case where some of them are slightly out of order compared to before. So yeah, my goodness, it is becoming quite the traffic jam coming down through the Kettle Bottoms now. And hopefully they get themselves sorted here.
Whoa,
because
that was a big closing rate difference there.
Yeah.
That had me nervous. I think we escaped that without incident, but yeah, when everyone's checking up and we got cars further back in the pack starting to pick up the pace, especially around an unsighted corner, there is the recipe perhaps for a disaster, which I think was averted here today.
So for those that aren't familiar, what's happening here is clean air is king in almost any bit of racing, unless you have enough of a draft to really be able to use that to make yourself faster. That, even with these long straights, won't be that big here. The drivers want to be out on their own with nobody in front of them, because, as you can see with them backing up, they're trying to create a space so that should they catch that car in front, they won't be held up in a portion where they are slower than you are. So with all the cars as jumbled as they were, that's why we're getting such a strange little start here. Those familiar with watching things such as Formula One should be very used to this, but in this series, this was highly uncommon.
Well, part of the reason is normally 25 minutes, that's plenty of time to get your lap in, but basically with no times on the board and a lengthy red flag at the beginning of the session, that meant everyone had to go. There was no time to wait and hope you found the clear track you were looking for. You had to go now, and that's what we saw on display there. It looks like everyone's able to more or less get that accomplished, and now we're on our first flyers here, and in about a minute and a half or so, we should have our first times popping up on timing and scoring. Keep in mind, it's not just about one fast lap. It could be about the second fastest lap, too, as this qualifying session has the potential to set the grid for both races this weekend. Exactly.
The drivers definitely need to try and use every lap that they've got at this stage, since it's going to take so long to get around there, that if you have one little problem out there, or if maybe you do get balked by a car in front of you that's a bit slower, it could be costly. With now less than 10 minutes left on the clock. While yes, there have been no official laps set, I do love that our quickest lap right now is 8 minutes and 25 seconds by David Musial.
All right. Well, you don't usually see a pole speed over 8 minutes unless you're talking about like the Nürburgring or something like that. And even then, I don't know. Yeah, pretty important time here to try and get that pace built up and get those tires right in their operating window quickly to take advantage of the track time.
Jared Thomas being out front is the first to set a competitive time with a 2:08.1, and then now others are coming in behind him, trying to see how they compare. So far, nobody able to overtake the 296, as he's had a lot of pole positions so far this season. Scott Blend, among the Masters drivers, is going to set a time of a 2:08.9, holds that provisional pole.
I believe it's 7 poles for Jared Thomas coming into this weekend. He has been the dominant force in the championship, the native of Indiana. 72 points his advantage, but he's going to have some competition here this weekend. Paul Bocuse, who has the second fastest time at the moment, he has been pretty quick here in his first year in these 911s, but the newcomer that could upset the apple cart a little bit is actually the teammate to Jared Thomas. Keep an eye on Aaron Johnson, and you might know the name if you've been following Jeremy Shaw's Team USA program, which does such a good job identifying promising up-and-coming young American talent, sending them over to the UK to race in the Formula Ford Festival and the Walter Hayes Trophy Formula Ford races. Aaron Johnson is a product of that Team USA scholarship. He's racing an MX-5 Cup this year for JTR Motorsports Engineering. That's Jared Thomas's team for whom he's driving here. This is a really talented guy, and I'm really excited to see what he can do as he comes to grips with this Porsche Cup car.
Meanwhile, for the 991s, it is Dmitry Dimakos who currently has the quickest time. Not a regular in this series, I'm pretty certain. I'll double check on that, but I don't recall that name having been around before. Also on screen for a little bit, we saw Peter Atwater and Therese Lalou getting a little bit close, and Atwater, I think, had to back off even to try and make himself some space, which again could be important because he's sitting 5th overall and 2nd in Masters, so he needs that second lap here soon.
You're right about Dimitri. It's his first start of the season. He did run a partial schedule last year, but he's from Chicago, so you would assume that he's got some experience racing here, has a little Carrera Cup experience as well, going back to 2022. So we'll keep an eye on him. But Thomas, his second lap, not quite as quick as his first, but it's only a couple tenths off, and that's important when we think about the grid for the second race of the weekend. Paul Bocuse got a little bit closer. He's now only a tenth off, and Aaron Johnson is only a further 10th back in the 3rd spot. Then it's Ashley Freiberg. Great to have Ashley back. She was involved in that big accident you referenced earlier at Watkins Glen, actually suffered a concussion in that event. That's why she's sitting out the endurance race this weekend, which she was initially planning on doing, but she feels all right. She said it took a little while to get back into the groove. It was her first time back in a race car since the crash when she got here for testing this weekend, but she's right back on it and right there in the top 4 where we're used to seeing her run.
It's one of the things that always impresses me about racers is we don't consider the psychological aspect of, you know, if you're in a small wreck, yes, you could probably bounce back from that. But something where you take a massive hit, and especially if it does cause injury, I'm sure there's lingering effects in terms of performance of questioning yourself. Well, do I want to attempt this? I don't want to experience that again. And yeah, for her to bounce back that quickly is a great sign. She sits 4th on the timing sheets. Conrad Geis, who inherited the win in that race, was in 7th before David Musial managed to be able to overtake him. That's Dave Musial 2.0, actually, I should clarify.
And he was also on the podium in that race. He finished 2nd. Therese Lalou scored her first podium in the championship in that race, finishing in 3rd. When the top 3 all tangled, that opened the door for a few others to walk on through that door and take advantage. That's exactly what they did. And there were a lot of happy folks up on the podium celebrating once they knew that everyone involved in the incident was more or less all right.
Yeah, exactly. So opened opportunities, and you got to take those when they come. Jared Thomas, though, is trying to see if he can bounce back as Paul Bocuse is holding him honest. 1/10 of a second over 4 miles between them. That is mighty tight. And Paul has been trying so hard to get his first win this season. Only had a single win last season where he took a championship. And I don't think he wants to repeat that necessarily.
That was in Cayman competition where you're right, he won the Cayman Pro-Am Championship with just the one win, but countless podiums, and he's been replicating a lot of that consistency this year. In fact, that crash in the second race at Watkins Glen, that was the first time all season he had failed to stand on the podium in one of these races. But Jared Thomas has been equally consistent and just that little bit quicker, where he's been able to win a bunch of races and build the points lead. But I talked to Paul yesterday, and he was pretty circumspect about the whole thing. He recognizes that he's racing against drivers in Freiburg and Thomas, and now this weekend in Johnson with a lot of racing experience where, yes, he's got a karting background, but Paul is very new to cars. Last year in Cayman's was his first experience in a full-bodied car, and now this is his first year in one of these 911s. So yes, he wants to win. Yes, he wants to break through, but he recognizes this is a great chance to learn and test yourself against drivers that have an established pedigree.
Yeah, I think he's been showing well for himself, honestly. With, like you said, almost entire podiums the whole season is a real testament. And even if he hasn't had the speed to beat Thomas yet on track, he's honestly been doing an incredible job with the consistency. Is just racking up what you can get is so critical to getting those results. Still have Scott Blend on top of the Masters with Atwater in second. That hasn't changed. Rob Walker coming in to 10th overall, sitting in third, but he's got a little bit of a buffer of those Pro-Am drivers between himself and his rivals.
Interesting to see how close some of the cars are and how others have been able to find space. You'd think even with this many cars in the field, and we've got 40 of them, I think, that are out turning laps at the moment. 4 miles, you can still space yourself out pretty well, and yet we end up with these clusters of race cars. Down under 2 minutes to go, so crucial time here to try and extract just that little bit more speed. Some have decided to call it quits. Scott Blend, I see, coming into the pit, so it looks like his qualifying effort is done. He feels like he's done enough. 5th overall, provisionally on class pole, and that would be huge for him with those 2 wins in his back pocket the last time out at Watkins Glen. He's very much in that championship fight, and a pole today would definitely help.
Yeah, Walker also came in, so he's done with qualifying from here. A minute remaining. We have a number of cars that are able to start another lap, but I think we're going to be seeing a couple of them getting that checkered flag here soon. I'm watching to see who's likely to hit that brick wall, and if they can improve on this lap. You can see that big climb up the hill to the start-finish line. Now less than a minute left on the clock with these last couple flashing across the line.
Taking a look at timing and scoring, there are a few that have turned in good sector times here on their most recent lap. Mark Kwame, good to have Mark in the championship. His MDK Motorsports team shifting their focus from Carrera Cup over to Sprint Challenge. And Mark, the veteran, down at 18th overall right now, but did turn in his personal best opening sector a couple of moments ago, so let's keep an eye on him. Jody Miller had a good opening sector too. We'll see if he can possibly improve, and a few others too. But most of the drivers that we see right now out on track are not improving on their previous laps, at least through the first couple of sectors.
Checkered flag is out. Thought Janson was going to be the first one to take it, but instead it is the 222 of Ashley Freiberg. Does not improve. She'll stay in fourth at best. The 242 is going to be the next one across as they go by. That's Lalu. She also is not able to go faster. Stays in 10th. Still a good position overall. 261 is going to bring it down into pit lane. There is a whole slew of drivers still out there. Very few have ended their qualifying early.
I think at a certain point you get the sense that you've gotten what you can get out of your Yokohamas, and at that point no sense putting any extra wear on them, so they sit stationary in the pits as the checker flag waves. Not just about taking care of the tires, but also avoiding any risk. How many times do we hear drivers say, well, I was on my last lap, I was going to pit, and then that's when the incident happened. And no sense taking that risk, especially if you feel good about the lap time you've already put up.
Absolutely. Still not seeing any green showing up, so it seems like maybe either track conditions or just the tires had lost their best here towards the end of the session. In fact, a few more are just going to come down pit lane without completing their lap. So they must have felt like that final flyer wasn't really showing much. Joey Bowden, I think, in the 145, the only one recently who seems to have improved. Mike Mim, though, in the 270, jumps up to 20th overall in the Regal Motorsports 992.
Nice improvement there. Good to see that it is still possible, even late in the session. Really interesting in the 991s that there's such a big gap between Dimitri Demekos there in 15th overall, Tony Melito down in 23rd, and Neil Meissner in 25th.
And Meissner's usually the one that is in the position that Demekos is in. So I'm very curious if something maybe went wrong with the 152, or he just wasn't feeling comfortable in this session. I haven't been keeping close tabs on what his practice times look like, but this is not typical of the Kelly Moss driver.
He's holding a couple of tenths off of Melito's time, though, and those two are typically right there, nose to tail. That's been the championship battle over the course of the season, so maybe that is indicative that there's no issue there. And I do wonder, too, about the fact that the 991s are down on power relative to the newer 992s, if that helps to explain why he's a little further down in the overall order than we're used to seeing. But there you see on the screen unofficial results from qualifying, and it looks like pole number 8 on the season, Joe, for Jared Thomas, but Paul Bocu's right there nipping at his heels.
Yeah, it remains at that point 1-1-0 between them, with Aaron Janson coming in and showing he's going to be a real problem for the two of them for that potential win, starting from 3rd, Ashley Freiberg 4th. Scott Blend on provisional pole for the Masters, with Peter Atwater going to be next to him there in 6th. You've got Conrad Geis with 7th, David Musial 2.0 in 8th, and Jens Hansen in 9th, with Therese Lalu rounding out your top 10. For the 991s, we have to go down to 15th for Demekos there. You can see he's going to be on the pole for them. As we mentioned, Melito, Meissner, the next ones down as we scroll through the remainder of our finishing order for this one. 39 cars setting a lap in this one, so it is going to be a full field. Next up, we head off to the actual racing as the Porsche Sprint Challenge North America Cayman class will kick off at 1:15 p.m. local time. That's 1:15 p.m. Central. That'll be race 1 for it. Make sure and join Ryan and myself, Joe Peak, as we'll be back for our first race of the weekend.